This is the Business Owners IT Podcast with Anthony Gerasch and Ryan Carter, where tomorrow's technology meets today's conversations.
Hi, I'm Tony Gerasch.
And I'm Ryan Carter, and this is the Business Owners IT Podcast.
A podcast where we discuss tips, tricks, and solutions for business owners involving all things tech.
And we're back to our CIS Control series on control number 15, CIS Control 15, Service Provider Management. Before we get started, companies, they do rely on multiple service providers for everything they do. Their cloud service provider, internet service provider. There's just so many different things that provide services for their company that it's important that you guys have practices in place to, vet those companies and also just to have a list of who does what for your company. So as we do that, Tony, you want to take us into it?
Sure. So we got like a list of 5 things, right? So as you're selecting your, your service provider, so, this should focus on securing and managing risk associated with external service providers who access, store, or process organization-sensitive information. That was a mouthful for me. Yeah. Anyways, the key objectives, right, is risk assessment. So you got to do risk assessments. Also, of the company that you're hiring should be doing risk assessments, vulnerability scans, internal and external scans. You should have contracts with them that clearly state, who's responsible for what, right? So when you have a service provider, you need to have a contract that clearly states what the service provider is supposed to be doing and what each individual's responsibility is. Monitoring, auditing. So you want your service providers to make sure that they're monitoring and auditing, the security posture and people's access and whatever else that, they're doing for you. Access control, you should only give the service provider access to what they need. If they don't need keys to everything, then you don't give them keys to everything. You just give them what they need. A good example is if you do a project for somebody and you have, there's some inputs and outputs, you only give them access to what they need. They don't necessarily need to see all your stuff, if that makes sense. Incident response, right? And the last thing you want to do is make sure your service provider has an incident and response plan. So, if we talk about managed service providers, because that's what Unique is, right? How does this pertain to a company like who hires us, right? As a provider, are we doing risk assessments? Yes. Do we have contractual agreements with all of our customers? Yes. Are we monitoring and auditing all of our techs? Yes. We know exactly who's getting into what they're accessing, what passwords they're accessing, exactly what they're doing at all times. Access control. We only give them access to what they need. So, we don't give them access to everything if they don't need it, right? And then incident response. If we have an incident, we have a incident response plan that we would follow should we have something happen.
Yeah, so, if you were to contract a company like us, we would we show all of this to you, and this is something that should be freely available to you from, say, your managed service provider or someone that you're vetting to become a managed service provider for you, is how they do. I mean, these are great questions just to ask them, do you do a risk assessment? What is our contract agreements? We put very detailed contract agreements we give you, and you have all of our terms and conditions on what we do and what we will service for you. It's all very well defined out, and it should be, so that you guys completely understand.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that any service provider that has access to as a company has access to your tools, the best question you can ask them, and we did a thing about what's the 10 questions you should ask a service provider, but you could simply ask them, hey, are you following any frameworks? Are you following framework like the CIS controls, or NIST, or NIST 171? Or CMMC, there's a whole bunch of them, right? We can list off a whole bunch of them. Are you following any frameworks? Yes or no?
That's the best question to ask.
Right.
In our industry, all of us are starting to say it. Anywhere we go, that's what people are talking about, is what cybersecurity framework are you following? If you just ask that as a baseline question, if they don't have an answer for you, then maybe it's time to look at somebody else.
Yeah, or ask them, or say to them, well, hey, I realize you're not following a framework, but we'd like to follow the CIS framework. Can you help us? And, if they're a good service provider, they'll be able to help you.
Mm-hmm. And this list, they should all know. It should be part of their consulting, the whole branch of what they do and don't do.
Right. And, one of the things, the reason for this is, to reduce risk of data breaches, unauthorized access from third-party providers, enhance accountability and compliance with with regulations, improve organizations' overall security posture when collaborating with external entities, right? So, as a service provider, we need to be doing more than most of our customers are doing, because we know that, if as a service provider, if you're have a breach, it's going to be could have severe impact.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And, this kind of brings us to the tip of the week here, which is, this seems redundant and boring of something they shouldn't do, but it is easy to start. And you should just start with a list of who your service providers are and then work your way from there. And then get a little bit more complex and then build your policies around it and what you should ask. And then every year you're going to want to assess that with your managed service provider, whomever, your cloud service provider, whoever's doing something for you. And another good thing too is we use a GRC tool when we do the CIS framework for people, and we can actually create inside of it the list and the questions for that policy that you can ask that service provider, where you just send them the link, they sign in and they check the boxes just like you would for, like, say, a cybersecurity insurance policy. It's the same, and we can do that work for you, and a lot of GRCs do that.
Yeah, and I mean, and some places aren't gonna, some places are not going to provide you answer these questions. So, chances of you getting Comcast or AT&T, they'll send you a link that says what their privacy policy is. AT&T will, the bigger they are, Microsoft, you're not going to be able to dive deep into them, but, you need to really dive deep into the smaller markets, the small businesses and the medium-sized businesses that are out there providing you service, and ask them.
Yep, exactly. And like with the bigger ones, you're going to get their terms and conditions. Just kind of go through them and figure out what they do and don't do. With those big guys, the biggest thing is they're not going to do a lot for you. So you just got to understand that in the very beginning if there's a problem.
Yeah, and I know that recently I met somebody, that provides payroll service at a Chamber of Commerce event, and I asked them, what are you doing to protect our data if I was to go with you? And they couldn't answer it. So it's kind of like, I'm not going to even look at these people, even though they're a small business, because I don't think they're doing enough to protect our personable, identifiable information.
Yeah, those are the right questions to be asking this day and age. It's just the way the world's starting to turn. Yep, agreed.
All right, well, this is kind of a small one, so I don't really have any more. Do you have any more on it?
No, I'm pretty good there. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to the Business Owners IT podcast, and hope to see you next week.
Yep, see you next week, where we talk about CIS Control 16, application software security. Thank you.
Unique computing solutions. Your IT challenges solved.